In times of chaos and breakdown, where might we turn for guidance? To Okay, friends, that was a bit of a false start, but here we are. I am Ian McKenzie, and I am one of the co-directors of the film Tamara, The Village of Lovers. And I am delighted here to welcome you here to the reboot of a format that myself and fellow filmmakers had created during the former Kickstarter campaign for the film that happened in the summer of 2019. And what we called this was Love School Lunch. And the idea behind Love School Lunch we'll get into in a little bit in a second. But I'm going to invite in my co-director here, John Wolfstone, to join me here while we share a little bit about what the origins of Love School Lunch and the intentions for our conversation today. There we are. Welcome, John Wolfstone.
Thank you, Ian. Excited to be here again.
And again, let's just jump in a little bit with what is the intention for Love School Lunch as a format, and also as a like a shared wondering about some of the themes, of course, that show up in our 7-year odyssey known as making this documentary film.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I think when we started the Love School lunches back in 2019 during a Kickstarter campaign that we ran um, in support of the film that was then called Love School, but is now called Village of Lovers, it's actually part of a wider project we're now calling the Love School Project. The idea was actually to take the inquiry that we were exploring in the film and bring it into dialogue live with ourselves and also others like you who might be watching now to join us. Because really, the larger intention of this project is really to create a larger cultural conversation around love, sexuality, community, and how these are core topics, core personal and political topics for us as we're in this moment of a really great unraveling and also great turning for our species. So we're here again as we're about now ready to premiere this film to the world, which we're going to be doing over the course of the next year. And we're wanting to re-engage this conversation also with the public. And we imagine doing this often, over the next months, and hoping to start having conversations with many of you so we can start exploring what is current now, what is true now about where we are at and our culture is at in regards to how we're learning to really love and once again step into love with ourselves, each other, and life.
I should just offer a absence or name an absence here. Julia Marianska, who's our third cohort collaborator in this Love School project, is unfortunately ill, so is not able to join us today. Though she will certainly be joining us in future Love School lunches.
What have we learned?
I don't know why John is. What have we learned about what?
I think we learned that having children makes you sick more often.
Okay, we may or may not get into that, but just to name again up front that the format of this is generally lean, about 30 minutes tops, and going into different subjects or different themes around what's bubbled and stirred from our time, largely with Tamara, but also in this, revillaging endeavor. What does it mean for love and how we love? And the other thing I want to mention is it is helpful to be interactive. So if you're tuning in live now, feel free to leave a comment or two. And, maybe we could weave that into our conversation as we go. So wait, you want to say one more thing?
Well, I have actually a question, Ian, to start us off. If you're
okay, let's do it.
Let me take the prompt here, which is the question that's bubbling in me because you shared this podcast earlier that you and Julia were on that was titled "Can Free Love Save the World?" And Ian, I want to ask you and really ask us, after doing this project for 7.5 years, can in fact free love save the world?
Just going for the big ones off the top. Well, it's interesting, right? Because that interview, which I'm actually going back and listening to again with fresh ears, because it was recorded for the podcast "Life is a Festival" through our friend Eamon Armstrong, and he's a great interviewer, so he plays a really good foil to a lot of these questions and sincerely asks them. And I think he even said, the title, which he came up with, actually, right? He came up with for that. He's like, is it sort of every San Franciscan rolls their eyes, when they hear something like that, but because that's where he is. He's based in San Francisco, and a lot of the quote polyamory, open loving movement, let's say, or at least practice and communities do seem to come from there, and of course, lots of other places. But it's worth unpacking as we do in the podcast. What does it mean by what do we mean by free love, right? And maybe
Mhm.
even what do we mean by world? But reflecting on it now, I'm about a third of the way back in the podcast, and as I reflect as well on this journey, I think that certainly there's deeper layers that have opened since initially encountering this community in Portugal, of course, which has been dedicated to this path for decades, right? And it's one of those things where you can encounter a culture, a community, even for example, like a permaculture garden, and feel just like the richness and miss so many of the deeper layers that are actually allowing this to be as it is, and like the relational work, and maybe it's almost like a relationship which is very solid and beautiful, and you might think, oh, that's the way it is, but like behind the scenes, of course, there's been like a ton of work, very likely, in order to arrive at that kind of place. So in that sense, my understanding is deepened in what does it actually take in order to create a culture where love can be free. And again, to talk about what do we mean by free love, because love is free, of course. Love is it's a state, it's a well, it's the deep care and well-being for others, maybe yourself. There's lots of ways that we can talk about love in that sense, but I think what we mean is how do we create the conditions where love can flow freely? And again, that can mean a lot of things. It can be in different domains, but that's only gotten even more um, maybe complex, but also um, awe-inspiring for me as the time has gone on in this project.
And, I think, actually what comes to mind when you're doing a project of this gravity, there's this kind of, I guess, like sequential layout that is thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And I feel like in some ways, free love saving the world was the thesis I think that we came in with, and in some ways is the thesis of Tamara. And I think in this journey, at some point, each of us, individually, as directors, as filmmakers, in our personal lives, really hit the antithesis. Like I was certainly, I think we've all seen the wreckage that can accrue when not being held in a community such as Tamara, that has that 40 years of building the permaculture garden of really trust and culture and mentors and elders that hold such a hot topic, as they say there in their German accents. That wow, actually trying to open to free love also can touch, create, and really awaken lots of trauma. I certainly was in a partnership for a couple years where my trauma and my fear, going back to my ancestors, was on the surface, and there was no way that free love was going to be healing at that moment. And I actually realized a lot around what it means to move at the pace of one's nervous system. And though now having that relationship also end and dissolve and run its course, I've really come to a place of, I'd say, synthesis in myself where I would say, well, yes, I think free love. And what I mean, the kind of the short term of free love is like, what is it to allow ourselves to create social structures, cultural structures where we can be in loving relationships beyond just friendship, the friendship box with more than one human, if that feels natural and true. And I'd say that actually looking back now from the whole arc, that yes, there still is a deep revolution for our species spiritually, culturally, somatically, all of the different layers to really lean into that exploration or even that question, because it tugs at the core, I'd say, of our fear of loss, of the fear of death that is underwriting our culture. And I have still not found anything better that actually creates real community than the natural bonds of love and eros. And I think that question of how do we break out of the binary of nuclear family and like heteronormative monogamous partnerships is still a kind of core structural question for our mass culture, as we're understanding the need to like deal with climate change and consume less, which only can really happen in structures of community where we actually share.
Well, this brings up actually a great short that actually we did release. I think it was around the time of the campaign. And this is actually a quote from Benjamin von Mendelssohn, who is the co-founder of the Global Love School, as well as one of the Tamaran leaders. And I actually have the quote here pulled up. We could actually play it. It's a short 2 minutes 30 seconds. But he talks about essentially why free love is the basis for a truth culture. So this actually, I think, speaks to what we're getting at now. So let me pull it up here and then see if we can get it to play.
A little behind the scenes.
Okay, how's that? I'm gonna go full screen on this, and then let's see how we do.
I love it.
For me, it's really important that we do not think that free sexuality, even if we name it correctly, sexuality free of fear, beautiful in itself, but it's really important to know that this is not the solution to all our trouble. In a way, it's different. It is like the basis on which culture in truth can grow. And it is only that important because it is that area of life and culture and religion which has been so suppressed. If it wouldn't be that, it find its natural way in creation. And it is still very central because eros has very high energy. It has a power to unite very strong polar energies. That's what eros is about. But it is not the end of the journey. In a way, it is the base for an ethical culture where you do not need to lie anymore. So free sexuality is the base layer for this ethical culture where we can be truthful with each other. Now, if you work on freeing sexuality, or actually healing love is a much deeper term, there are two things that I want to point out. One is it needs a lot of commitment of the participants. You can have your adventures here and there, but that has not much to do with healing love. Because in healing love, you need to go through the processes that take time. It's not just the high of falling in love and then the high of falling in love with the next one. It is actually working through the layers that have been hurt in my biography and as a culture in history. And for this, working these deeper layers out, you need a circle that is deeply committed to that work. We say a community. That's one side of it. And the second side of it is that it's not just about focusing on that issue. To have, the African proverb, it needs a village to bring up one child. It needs a village, actually a culture, to free one person from all fear in love and sexuality. It needs a culture that in all aspects supports that freedom. You cannot say, yes, we free love and sexuality from our fear and competition, but our economy runs on competition. You cannot say, oh, we will not dominate women anymore. Yeah, but sure, we will keep exploiting and dominating the earth. These are things that are in a system, they don't work. So in a way, free sexuality and free love is really only one aspect of our culture, which then will infuse with its principles of life all other aspects of our culture.
Wow.
So let's unpack that a bit now.
I mean, first to say, just 7.5 years in this project, and still, Benjamin's words feel fresh and hit me. And, I feel like I could study those 2.5 minutes for that could be worth a whole film in many ways, what he just shared there. And
in many ways is the film, I think. It's actually, what is the ecosystem of mutual support, solidarity, commitment needed in order to free love from fear, in order to heal a whole context that is necessary, I suppose, right? Versus the hero's, the solo journey often, which is so much about being in the dominant individualistic culture, right? Anyway, just to add that.
Yeah, and that's, it's, I mean, just what comes to mind is the ethic, he said it, the ethic of free sexuality or like honesty in that realm, which I don't think it means that the honesty means that therefore you sleep with more people because you feel the desire. I think there's an honesty that you can then find the truth, the relational truth. I think for most people, it still wouldn't be what's honest or supportive in the relationship if you really started to reveal all the layers of truth that either person necessarily goes and sleeps, has sex with other people, at least right away. But the willingness to actually bring forth that truth, I think, is a key component. And I think to really do that, what he's saying, this is really the whole cultural turnkey. We need to find our belonging, our embedment, and like that sense of like home and non-separation that I think we're all searching for in partnership, in community, in culture. And until we innerly make that shift, that's even what we're going for, and realize that actually our culture has placed all of that into usually one person or the nuclear family, we're not going to be able to create a culture that can heal love or really create peace, because that is in some ways the trauma inheritage, the trauma inheritance that we've received from eons of colonization, that our belonging got withered down to this one point where it doesn't really work. And that for me is another really big goal of this film, I'd say, is to like wake people up to the longing, but also the understanding that community isn't just like, oh, that'd be nice. And it actually isn't just totally out there. It's a like inner point that we have to actually understand and realize, and just see like this is the only way forward. What now? How do we start creating truth and trust now and stepping slowly towards that outerly in the world?
Well, I released a newsletter today, which I sort of reflected upon, this question too, like what is community? And one thing that came to me, from my time certainly with Tamara and working on this film, but also influenced by my time in the Orphan Wisdom School, right, with Stephen Jenkinson, that this thing came to me, which is essentially the trade. Like, what is the real trade, or what is the prized possession that the individualistic culture offers, which doesn't actually seem like worthwhile, and yet it's very hard for people to give up. And I say it, I phrase it as the right to loneliness,
Mm-hmm.
right? To have a right to loneliness, which is so much I see in the dominant culture, which is people want community, but they actually don't want to give up a sense of, I don't mean individualistic sense of, that you are distinct from others. Like that's good. And that's, a healthy ego structure is necessary. But like there's something else. And I think for me, it's actually the fear of actually being of consequence to other people, the fear of actually being seen by other people in a meaningful context. It's like what so many of us crave, and yet at the same time fear, because it touches that deep ancestral wounding, that it's almost too, it's too molten in a way, right? To really allow that to fall away. And that requires essentially a committed group of people to actually kind of be there long enough, I think, where that death grip in a way to loneliness can relax.
And
Right. And people touch it in things like workshops, right? They touch it in these like moments, or like at festivals, Burning Man, all beautiful in a sense. But so many of those to me are, I would call them affinity groups, right? I would call them affinity groups. They're brought together through a shared affinity to, co-creation, to hobbies, to even like political ideologies. But that to me is distinct from people that commit fully for, decades together to help weave and hold and navigate through all of life's, mayhems, and births and deaths and, ritual processions of the seasons. Like to me, this is the rhythm of community, i.e. village, which I think is worthwhile to distinguish from again, just like community as affinity groups, as we get together and we shared consume together, which many people mistake for community these days.
And I think I think you and I and Julia and the people we know who've been not just doing this film because it's a film we wanted, but doing this film because we want to live this. I feel grief in this moment as you say that, because we've had many journeys of trying to step towards that and not quite yet figuring out how do we really step into that commitment further. And what comes to me is on that notion of consequence is that to really make that commitment, the group of people has to understand one, like what really the consequence is that they're trying to step into of all the like historical pain and trauma that they're going to be encountering, and the deep consequence of what it actually is to shift culture in that way. Because that commitment point, that is community, that is where we find the bond of family that we're seeking. And most of us, or the people are probably watching here, realizing we need to be seeking outside of just bloodlines. And then for me, last point of this, the question comes, what does the power of sexuality and eros like do, or what is the role in that in actually creating that commitment? Because when eros does flow and you can touch the mag, I can't say the right word, but
Magma.
the magma, that is the like love feeling that comes from like erotic bonding, that can actually create a basis, not just the only basis, but that combined with the understanding, I think, are the ingredients to actually come to a point when you know that we're not going to leave each other anymore. But you actually need that power and trust that power of eros, which essentially as a wide culture we distrust. And what if eros was intelligence, was a force of God even, which is what Tamara considers.
I want to bring into that something that's been tempered for me and maybe for you and others in this understanding is that oftentimes, and this is probably recognizable, I think, to a lot of people in just the dating pool, at large, but the mistaking sexuality for the desire for intimacy, right? That in fact, intimacy is the often the longing, and that can come in many forms, but as well a kind of a physical intimacy, right? And sometimes I differentiate between sensuality and sexuality, right? Like there's sort of or even like a somatic embodied sense of trust, right? And nourishment, and so in that sense, the mistaking of that means that there's a leap often to an erotic encounter, a sexual encounter in a moment, and then that can be obviously a big overjump because it's so powerful that I can really blow apart relationships, communities, right? Can blow apart when they don't know how to handle like what can get sort of unleashed or unearthed, with this kind of thing, and which is why I think so many free love communities have failed, whereas Tamara in this case has managed to continue and to thrive to this point because they have those structures of support, those people deeply committed. So anyway, I just want to say that even from my own understanding of tempering is, and if people listening are saying, oh, so is that the goal then? And I think, no, for me, it's a question of one, how to create somatic trust and like a flow of nourishing contact within a group, right? And that can be accomplished in a lot of ways, from like non-sexual physical touch and contact improv dance. And there's lots of ways, right? Groups can build that physical intimacy together, as well as the commitment to truth. And so where are the places in which truth can be spoken, not acted upon necessarily, right? Of, okay, there's an attraction now it has to be acted upon, but just to simply create the vessel for truth, that can actually create more intimacy within a group. Because then again, like what Benjamin said, people don't have to lie, like or withhold, which can create lots of undercurrent dynamics which never really get spoken to, can come out sideways. And that's what he means, I think, when he says that truth is the fundamental basis for a culture that has to get over that hurdle, right? Where it's like everything's only okay as long as we don't actually say what's going on. And Tamara's genius was, for example, processes like the forum, which I don't think we have to unpack here. We could probably do it at a different point, but ways in which truth can be spoken in a collective group, which diffuses the volatility possibly, right, of different truths, within a group collective that can hold it, and actually ends up building more trust and intimacy.
And I think, at that base level, like the intimacy that we seek, which is what I think we are all seeking, that is coming from truth. And that's where it's, if you really want the intimacy, that longing, that depth, that union with your partner, well, can you hold space can you somatically hold hearing when they might sexually long for somebody else? Because that will actually bring you into the intimacy that you're seeking. And you have to be able to hold really the intimacy in oneself, which means also learning how to hold the space for the difficult emotions that arise in oneself. And the way we learn to do that, I think, in ourselves is also through being held by others in these kind of spaces. But because we're coming from such a situation of so much historical, ancestral, personal pain, we have to approach these things all slow, much slower than I think we realize. And I think that's probably what you, me, and Julie have taken away the most. It's like, wow, community, love, sex, these are all huge, important, powerful things. And how do we slow down so we can get more nuanced and almost granular and really not jump over steps? Because what we've learned is that anything you jump over is going to come back and bite you in the ass later and will eventually explode a relationship or a community. And that's, for me, though, is even having the slowness and then the somatic awareness, or the relational sensitivity, which I think we've gained a lot of, where like you can sense when something's off with somebody else. You can sense when your partner or your loved one is like uncomfortable, and can you slow down enough to track that with them and like bring that forth and that be more important, that truth be more important than maybe the thing you're after, the thing you're trying to gain. And that's already a pretty big system change to approach in that kind of way.
Mm. Well, I think we've laid the groundwork for some deeper threads to go down. One overture maybe that I want to say of things that I'd love to talk about also in the future are things like the understanding of attachment trauma and wounding and attachment styles in community, because that's something actually very interesting that I don't think is talked about much.
Yeah.
Certainly it is within relational, like kind of intimate relationals, but actually how it shows up in community has been a huge learning, as well as even like family constellation, triangulations that happen in community that, again, was something I didn't anticipate, but certainly have learned a lot from some of the experiments that we've done over the years as well. So, we're rounding out the end of our 30 minutes, and I want to highlight that, of course, this is the start of hopefully, an ongoing conversation series around a lot of these themes that we've been touching on. Multiple guests like we've had in the past, as well as being joined by our co-filmmaker, Julia, in future episodes. And of course, the biggest thing coming up very soon is the premiere, or the sneak preview, I should say, sneak preview of our film, Tamara, The Village of Lovers, which is happening December 3rd and 4th. This is the first time it's being publicly shown, well, semi-publicly shown. And not only do we have the film screenings, but we also have the special guests like Sabine, who's the co-founder of Tamara, Sabine Lichtenfels, as well as Martin Winiecki, head of the IGP, that's the Institute for Global Peace. We've got Ida Shibley, as well as Alnor Lada, both political activists who've also spent time in Tamara and bridge a lot of the kind of, community with how does that translate into, working in different conflict zones and deep political work. And then we have a conversation with Charles Eisenstein and his partner Stella Eisenstein as well, who also attended the Love School back in 2017, who are featured in the film. And they're going to talk about that impact, on their understanding of partnership and, some of the learnings from their time in the Love School. Anything else you want to add, John?
And that we're going to also have a really beautiful integration space on Sunday to unpack, like, how did the experience of the film and really the whole day on Saturday move us, and how do we work with that and bring it into next steps for our lives. So really excited for you to come. I also want to say that's also a fundraiser for us to really bring this film forth to the wide global audience in a huge way come spring 2023.
Mm-hmm. And this film has largely been supported deeply by those of you tuned in, listening, supporting us. We've had 2 crowdfunders so far for this film, which has been deep labor of love over this 7-year odyssey. And it's still kind of wild to me to think that we're actually coming to a completion to showing this initial look at the film. You can check it out at thevillageoflovers.com. Check out the event Reimagining Village, Eros Community and the Sacred is the name of that. And please jump in, register, join with others as we offer this first glimpse and experiment really to what's stirred and how do we work with it in a meaningful way. How does this translate into a deep culture regeneration?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks.
That's
Ian.
it then. Shall we call it there?
Let's call it there.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for listening, and hope to see you soon. Thank you for listening to this